welcome back to the Canadian Ruck. This is Jamie Gray. Canadian Ruck would really like to welcome Jonathan Kaplan. Jonathan is hailing from South Africa, but he's now living in the Toronto region. He's repped over 70 test matches. He was the first to reach 50 test matches. When he retired, he was the most capped test official of all times. He's since been passed. Refereed 13 World Cup matches, and he was the first South African to officiate in 4 Rugby World Cups. He's also refed a number of Bledisloe, Tri-Nations, and Six Nations matches. He's the only ref to participate in 4 British Lions tours. He's got over 100 Super Rugby matches to his credit, over 160 Currie Cup matches to his credit. He's also won 5 South Africa Official of the Year awards, including 4 in a row. He's kind of done it all, and now he's bringing his game overseas to the Major League Rugby, where he's the lead for appointment and development of match officials for the 2021 season for Major League Rugby. Major League Rugby is very lucky to have him, and he's going to do some great things. So Jonathan, he will be coming up very soon. Just a little plug. We do this every pod just because we're going to make sure everybody knows what's going on. You want to contact us, we're on Twitter at Canadian Ruck, Instagram, _Canadian_Ruck, Facebook at The Canadian Ruck, and our email is thecanadianruck@gmail.com. Never hesitate if you have any questions or you have queries for guests or you want me to try and get somebody on, reach out. Remember, too, when you're watching and listening, make sure you follow and subscribe and make sure that you're pushing these great rugby stories out to other people in Canada and around the world. Let them know we're on YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, Google Podcasts, and CastBox. And always direct them towards our website where you can see still frames of me with my guests over Zoom. You have links there to some different things. You can also take a look at our swag. We've got ball caps, we've got toques, we've got hoodies. And the website is thecanadianruck.weebly.com. Looking at some stuff in the news, this kind of stretched over the last 10 months or so. But it's been going on for a while. One of the big things that I've always found different about rugby, and one of the things that I've enjoyed most about rugby, is the amount of respect it has for officials, which is often different than other sports. And I don't think anybody could argue that. I mean, I think rugby really holds referees and officials to a higher standard of the game than many other sports do. But I've noticed recently over the last few years, there's been some microaggressions popping up all over the rugby world. You know, a big one happened last February with Dan Biggar, where he kind of verbally assaulted ref Matthew Carley during a loss to France. And it was published. It was publicized. You've also seen acts from Johnny Sexton, Owen Farrell, Greg Laidlaw, even Dane Coles. Those ones come to mind. I mean, just this past weekend, watching the autumn internationals, I noticed many players giving little side chirps to the officials. And it's just something that's been creeping more into the game, and it's not good for the sport. My concern is that when these players are losing respect, and it slowly is morphing into how other sports, looking like how other athletes from other sports treat their officials. And let's be honest, these guys and these women, the youngsters imitate their heroes. So what has been happening over the last few years, and I've noticed this in high school, is that this is happening more and more where it's creeping into the high school game as well. Nigel Owens has even chimed in, and I like this quote from Nigel: "We don't want football-style dissent in our sport. Although this is not about taking the moral high ground, because clearly we have issues. I must emphasize, this is not about rugby taking the moral high ground, because clearly we have issues we need to deal with ourselves." And he's spot on. You see it nowadays far too frequently in games, where players are just constantly chirping and giving their 2 cents when it's not needed. It just seems those microaggressions are happening more and more frequently. My concern is in North America is how officials are treated here in other contact sports. And in my mind, I go to hockey or football, where refs are often abused by players, coaches, and fans alike. Or basketball. I watched a high school basketball game the other day, and players were constantly mouthing at the ref, and I'm thinking, just throw the kid out. You know, that's what we would do in rugby. The kid needs to learn respect, and if it's not coming from his coaches, then the official needs to step up. And that's one thing that I've noticed in coaching. I coach high school rugby, I coach rookie rugby, I coach provincial rugby, but I also have coached hockey. I've coached house league hockey, I've coached major midget hockey, I've coached high school hockey, I've coached high school soccer, I've coached baseball, like a bit of everything. And one thing that I always mention to parents when, they're concerned, like, well, I'm worried about the roughness aspect of rugby. And I walk them through the respect aspect. And one case comes to mind quite easily is when we were playing one of our fiercest high school rivals in rugby. And as a coach in rugby, I walk the sidelines. I walk almost the full length of the pitch as I kind of follow the player. I'm, a little bit behind it, a little bit ahead, but I always walk. And a player on the opposing team got a penalty, and one of the parents started yelling and cursing and swearing at the ref. And I was standing right there, and I said, "Excuse me, what's the issue?" And he said, "Well, that shouldn't be a penalty." And anyway, I just calmly explained what the penalty was, and he goes, "Oh, well, that makes sense. We're hockey people. We didn't understand that was a penalty." And for me, it was a chance to educate parents as to what these issues are and how to actually respond. So that's what we do in my school team is, it doesn't matter if you're playing hockey in the winter or basketball or soccer, whatever sport it was. When it comes to rugby, the official on the pitch is the one who has the most respect, and you have to garner that towards them. And I think we lose that. We're starting to lose that. If that had been in Canada, if that had been a hockey parent or maybe a football parent in the States or whatever, that might have started a fight by me just addressing him. But the fact that I could stand there and calmly say, "This is what happens," and walk the sidelines with parents off the opposition or talk to players on the other team, it's just different than any other sport. Now, saying that, I watched the All Blacks in Argentina yesterday. This is Sunday the 29th as I'm recording. I watched the All Blacks in Argentina. And I had a new sense of respect there. Akira Ione, who's playing flanker for the All Blacks, had a high tackle around the 25-minute mark. Right on the Argentina try line. It basically, New Zealand was probably going to score. He just got too aggressive in his tackle. Ref blew it down. Ione knew it, and immediately he raised his hand and marched back. No words, no chirps, no shaking of his heads, just the acknowledgement of his actions and a trot back 10. That is something I love to see, and you don't see it in any other sport. And if you do see it, it is extremely, extremely rare. So good on you, Ione. That was great. I really, really love seeing that. And that takes us to a gray area. Are players taking more shots at the officials nowadays? Or are they just being caught more because of TV coverage, internet coverage, things like that? I don't know. I think it's at a place where it needs to stop. It needs to, the officials need to come down a little more. The associations need to come down a little more and help walk players through those actions, because it's not good for the game at all. And I'd like to hear back from you. I'd like to hear what your thoughts are as well. All right, before we get to Jonathan, I got to tell you a little bit about Hall Brothers Enterprises, hallbrotherenterprises.com. Starting on Friday the 27th, so a couple days ago, going through to December 3rd, so for a full week, they have all Cub Cadet snowblowers are up to $300 off at Hall Brothers. Hall Brothers is in the Norton area, just outside of St. John and Sussex. They serve that area. They serve all of New Brunswick for all your farming and winter needs. And if you're interested, if you're looking for a new snowblower, I bought one a few days ago. It is beautiful. Call Rory Reeker at 506-434-1260. Rory can hook you up with anything you need. Again, that's Hall Brother Enterprises out of Norton, New Brunswick. Coming up now, Jonathan Kaplan. Canadian Ruck welcomes Jonathan Kaplan today. We're very fortunate to have you here. It's going to be great for Major League Rugby. So, Jonathan, welcome to the Canadian Ruck.
Thank you.
So, Jonathan, let's get right to this. So, you're from South Africa. You had a stellar rugby reffing career. When you retired, I think you were the most capped official. Talk to us about how and why you became a referee and get into it and get into the game that way.
Yeah, so I think rugby in South Africa is a bit like ice hockey in Canada. It's pretty much a religion, and it was certainly from the people I associated with was the major sport. I think I wasn't probably big enough, and I didn't have the discipline in terms of training to make an impact on the playing field. And I was pretty up to date and astute in respect to the laws and how the game was played. And eventually, in my matric year, my mother suggested that I become a ref because I'd had my nose smashed, taking me to hospital. "Oh, this is the last time I'm taking you to hospital." And she made some calls on my behalf. And in those days, even a 17-year-old was too young. But she pushed hard enough for me to get a gap. Took my first game a couple of months later and never looked back. So that's really how I got into it. It's I'm 37 years into it now. I haven't stopped reffing, and hopefully I can carry on for another few years still.
That's a nice story. I think every mom probably tries to push their kids into officiating instead of playing games sometimes. So good on your mom for following through. So John, what attracted
Well,
you?
I definitely did better as a referee than I would have done as a player. And so if that's your measure of success, because I think there's other measures of success like team sport, or how well you make a lot of friends in team sport, whereas refereeing is a bit sort of lone ranger every now and again, and we can go into that later on. But I found my niche, and I'm very happy that I got pushed into that sort of domain. It was good for me.
It's a great attitude to have. I like that. So spent all these years coaching or reffing international. Now you're in Canada. You're running Major League Rugby ref. Talk to us how that happened. What attracted you to coming over this side of the pond?
Yeah, I think from a South African perspective, I'm 53 now, so I'm always going to have a large part of me will be South African. But I took a view that the leadership in South Africa was either defunct or corrupt, and I didn't really see how they were willing or able to turn things around and unite the country as Mandela had done 25 years before. And so I put in papers to come to Canada. Why Canada? Because I have family here. They've done well. They like the place. And, so I've got my dad here with his wife, 3 half sisters. My 2 brothers are here with their families. So it was sort of a natural landing spot. But, and Toronto's where most of them are. So that, once again, it's not a cheap city. There's a lot of challenge around Toronto. But, it's first world, very well educated. Takes a bit of getting used to. Like, I think culturally, South Africans are a bit more familiar, bit more backslapping and relaxed. And I think Canadians are probably a bit more PC and, just in general, a bit more first world. So, that's in general why I made the move. And in terms of MLR, I didn't have a role when I arrived here. I did apply for a role as the CEO of Ontario Rugby, got through to the final interview, didn't get it, and they appointed a really good guy who I think deserved to get it. But so I just had to get into job search, which I didn't really understand how difficult it was coming from South Africa, and also with a depressed job market. The COVID hit at a terrible time for me. But I was very fortunate that an opportunity came up to get involved with MLR in a sphere where I really think I can make a big difference. And so for me, it was, I like getting well paid for my expertise. I've spent a lot of time in rugby. But having said that, I really like to make a difference. And so on 2 fronts. One of them is to institutionally, so where I can use my game experience, my knowledge of these type of events all over the world, and also to the individuals that I touch. There's a group of young referees. Some of them are not going to make it. Some of them will make it. And hopefully I can input in a positive way to make the bell ring and for them to be able to progress. And hopefully a couple of them will be at a World Cup soon.
I think that's that's going to be a great opportunity for those young officials coming through the MLR, having somebody like you and your tutelage skills to enable them to move forward. Every player's dream is to play nationally and go to a World Cup, and I imagine every official's dream is to advance far enough so that they can officiate at a World Cup as well. We'll get to that in a little bit because you've had your fair share there. You've been in Canada for a little while now. You've seen us on the world stage. What do you think are some opportunities or challenges facing Canadian rugby as a general?
I think finances are without doubt the biggest, their biggest challenge. I think in the sort of early to mid 90s, I think Canada was a very tough, robust, aggressive, and quite a strong rugby nation. And I think they took that through quite nicely into the late 90s. But I think with the advent of professionalism, I'm not sure if that suited Canada. And whereas other countries have put a lot more resource into it, Canada wasn't really able to. and so they've fallen behind and they've kept slipping and slipping, and so they're pretty much on the precipice now as far as most people are concerned. And it's going to take someone with a special vision, or someone with pretty good skills around networking and creating opportunity in terms of the financial sphere for the sport to be elevated to a different level. That is a big problem. If Canada don't make a World Cup, and a country like Brazil do, who are definitely up and coming, it could be, I don't think it'll be good for our rugby at all. And, it'll take a long time to come back from that. So I think we're hanging on the edge. I know there's a lot of good people here. Canada's got a pretty rich rugby culture. I've been exposed to that both as a referee and now, as a resident of Canada. Not all of it, but, just it never came through. But, there were games organized in Manitoba for the Toronto Arrows recently, and it didn't come through because there are challenges in and around COVID. But the enthusiasm around that game was pretty cool. So, and I know that, in Calgary, they've also got a very strong rugby culture. It may be rooted in volunteerism, which is volunteerism and, and amateurism are issues in the professional game. But Bill Webb and the Toronto Arrows have stepped it up, and they've really filled a very necessary and needy hole for the, I think for the Canadian rugby population.
I love listening to you there. You haven't been in Canada overly a long time, and you're already referring to Canadian rugby with we and our. You've already kind of adopted it, and I like that.
Yeah.
So let's jump back a little bit to your role with Major League Rugby. What goals do you have? Like you've touched a little bit about helping those up and coming refs, but what else can you see happening with your role to try and help Major League Rugby grow?
Yes, I think. I look at it holistically. I mean, I don't think I can go into all the detail at the moment because some of it is still in motion. We're still in process of making changes. And I don't think they'd really want me to, put that on an open forum before it's been finalized with the teams.
That's fair.
But I do, just as an example, I think there's some areas where, because I've been exposed to it already, I'm able to then, offer an opinion around a change that may be beneficial for the game, and sometimes it takes sacrifice. So sacrifice from the teams, but sometimes it's pretty much nothing. There's not much that's going to have to be sacrificed, and there's huge gains. And I think in the North American context, I think it's very important that you portray rugby as a dynamic game, which is different from NFL. Like we're not challenging NFL or those type of sports because I never say never, but that's entrenched. It's part of the culture in this part of the world. And rugby is a second tier sport, but in terms of the beauty, I grew up with rugby. I could have chosen other sports as well. I played a bit of tennis. I did karate. I was exposed to a lot, but for me, rugby was the best sport because it's dynamic. And I love the flow attached to it. And I think if you're a skilled referee or a skilled administrator, you'll be able to get the best possible results so that the American public can be exposed to a beautiful product. And hopefully we skim some of the market, and some people go like, hey, my first sport is NFL, but I love watching rugby union as well.
Yeah, I agree. The dynamics of rugby is amazing compared to some of the other sport. When people compare it or try to compare it with the NFL, it doesn't make any sense at all. It's more like a hybrid of basketball or soccer or hockey, how it's just free flowing and nonstop. But yeah, the comparisons with football I've never understood how that happens.
Yeah, I think, look, I think there's some elements of rugby that are a challenge. For people that don't know, I suppose the maul and the scrum are pretty ugly. And I'd hazard a guess that not everybody loves watching those repeat themselves. But similarly, I don't think watching a running back running at a wall is very attractive either. But there is a skill attached to that, in terms of the athlete, the play call, the clock, the strategy around it is interesting for me. And similarly in rugby, it's you got to have contests of strength all over the park, and the scrum is one of them. And I think if it's officiated well, if we train up the referees well, I think it's not really that difficult to understand why it is an important facet of the game.
Yeah, that's absolutely. I like people that know rugby, I love watching great scrums, and I love watching good rucking. And one thing in my mind is that rucking has changed so much over the years. I'm not even sure if it's considered a ruck anymore, but how it's diversified from the 90s, even early 2000s to now, where it's just one guy standing over top and hanging on to the guy in the ground. And in here, at least, we teach you can't hang on to that person. You're not supporting your own weight. That person needs to be able to crawl out of the ruck. But when you watch professional rugby, it's a complete opposite. They hang on to those bodies and they're diving in. And it just seems like rucking is kind of not how it was intended. I think it's evolved to the point where it's really a huge, as you said, more of a strategic play than anything else. Maybe I'm talking out of turn there, but how do you see that as being, as an official?
Yeah, I probably don't see it quite like that. I think rucking has been, it's probably been purified, and in my opinion, for the better. In the past there was a lot of stamping on players and rucking, and the stamping under the guise of rucking was pretty dangerous sometimes. Sometimes if a player got stood on and he got spat out the back of a dynamic ruck, he probably didn't, he probably felt a bit aggrieved, but not that he wasn't that hurt. However, if he couldn't escape, then he was going to get hurt. So, I think they've taken that out the game. Too many mommies with loud voices, and rightly so. So, if I look at what happens now, I think post-tackle, we're just looking at a good clean-out. And what is a clean-out is something where we don't favor the attacking team with just a seal off so that they can just recycle the ball and have it until they make a mistake, but rather once again a contest. And if a player is able to knock a player over, and both of their bodies are on the ground, this is a inevitable consequence of the dynamic act of cleaning, and cleaning is part of the ruck. So you're cleaning a player to take away his right to the contest, and if you do it effectively, the ball is produced well for the benefit of the game. So I'm happy to talk around a couple of the laws, but I actually don't think that the ruck is that bad at the moment, and I think if it's well refereed, it has great results.
I think that's fair. Yeah, it's just one of those things that always rattle around in my brain, how we teach kids at high school. And maybe it's just a variation of trying to keep players safe when they're learning, and watching professional. I think that's definitely fair. I want to look a little bit about a year though. You've had a really awesome career. 4 Rugby World Cups, Bledisloe matches, Currie Cup matches, Tri-Nations, Six Nations, some really as high profile as it gets. Can you talk to us about like what those experiences were like, the nerves you might have faced, the intensities of those matches, like different ways that you would approach them? Like, is it a different approach for New Zealand versus South Africa as it is England versus Wales? What's your mental preparation for those matches?
I think I try to prepare well for all games, irrespective of whether it was a World Cup game, a Currie Cup game, or a schools game even. Obviously, they're all different, and so the preparation is different as well. And then the more game experience you get, the more you understand what you need to do as a referee. Because as I say to everybody that I come into contact with, it is not just about the law book, because you'd have a very poor referee if it was someone who just threw the law book at you every time he blew his whistle. For me, it's more about expectation. So what is the expectation around your main protagonists, the players on the field? And so at schoolboy level, as you rightly say, there's rugby's a bit more naive. There's maybe a stronger, but there's a strong accent on player safety. And, there's still young men that are growing into their bodies. So perhaps, that type of thing is high up in the consciousness of referees and administrators. In terms of, the World Cup matches. I was fortunate enough to do 13 World Cup matches. I did quarters, semis, probably a bit unlucky not to do a final, but I had a lot of other joys, so I'm not going to moan about that. But I always thought that the Bledisloe Cup was the kind of rugby that I enjoyed reffing. The tournament, the Six Nations tournament, was my favorite tournament because of the history and prestige of the competition. And once again, I set a benchmark for others to attack, where I did 19 of those Six Nations games, and it's subsequently just been passed by Wayne Barnes and Nigel Owens. I loved those games, but the Tri Nations in those days, and the only one I could do was Australia, New Zealand, was the rugby was incredibly quick. It was fast paced. There was a lot of the players knew each other pretty well. I think a lot of strategy went into it, and in those days, Australia were very competitive. So most of the games that I reffed were one. I reffed 8 of those, and I think 6 of them were one score wins for one of the teams. And I just loved, like, a lot of those characters of that era feature quite highly in my estimation of players who reached true greatness. So I'd say probably those are the best. And in terms of you mentioned the intensity, so those are the ones. In a World Cup, you do a lot of games where there's minnows playing. No disrespect, I did Canada a couple of times against Japan. I did the US against England. Those are minnows against a tier 1 country. Doesn't really mean that the game has to go according to script. In general, the World Cup has proven that it does, but you do have every now and again a result. In terms of the nerves, I'm just a very lucky guy that I don't have. I think if I stand up in front of 20 school kids, I'm more nervous about how I'm going to tap into what they want than if I run out in front of 100,000 people, because I sort of feel detached. I think you can sort of draw an analogy between someone jumping off a 2-story building or jumping out of a plane. I think it's probably, I haven't done this yet, but I think it's probably easier to jump out of a plane than to jump off a 2-story building. So when that happens, you let me know how you feel. Yeah. I'd love to do it. I just have, it's not something that if I died, I would go like, oh, would have loved to have done that. So, but if I do it, I'll be very grateful. It'd be a nice opportunity. Are you going to start with a 2-story building and then work your way up, or? No. Listen, I'm not going to purposely jump. Even a swimming pool at the moment is a challenge for me. So, I just, and I think you also mentioned about difficult thing of being a ref. And I think for me, it was about something that I wasn't prepared for, was media, and how the media concoct stories that they want to sell to the public. And it's often not facts. And you're seeing a lot of it playing out now in the political sphere. So it happens all the time. It's almost like, I always loved this guy, David Hands. He used to write for the Times in England. And I always looked at his articles and I thought, this guy's actually watched the game. He's seen the main points in the game. He's mentioned them in his article. He is an English writer, but he tried to be as unbiased as he possibly could. And then at the end, he made a couple of comments and left the public to decide what they thought of the game. And you hardly ever see that anymore. You're basically seeing people talking about stories that sometimes don't even exist, and they tell the public what they want them to hear. And so when I came across this in my own career, you got to, and this was explained to me, I didn't know it on my own, but when you've got an Australian writer writing for an Australian audience, and I'm just using that as an example, he's parochial. He wants to send a message across that will attract his audience to read his article. And sometimes the article is not fair to the to the referee, as an example, or to the visiting team, as an example. But you got to deal with it. And I wasn't really, I suppose I wasn't really prepared for that, because I thought, where's the justice in that? I'm trying to be as even-handed as I can when I run out onto the field. I'm not looking at favoring any team. Why is the reporter looking at favoring one aspect? But it's just something you've got to grow into. You've got to understand it, and you've got to accept that it's part of the domain.
Did you do anything, or did you have somebody help you through that, like tutor you with that, or what? Like, how did you get over dealing with stuff like that?
Some of it I took to heart initially. Like I wanted to call the writer and say, why did you put that? You know very well that's not the case. But after consideration, I thought to myself, everybody's got an opinion. I'm not going to change his mind about me or the way I referee. And if I have to call every person that writes something unfavorable, I'm going to lose sight of my own goals. So, I don't know if this, I never know these days, but in this book that I wrote about my career, the one chapter was about barking dogs. And the quote was, around Winston Churchill said, if I had to throw a stone at every dog who barked at me, I'd never be able to get to my destination. And I think that's a brilliant line, because
like that.
focus is about keeping your eyes on the target, on the prize, and not getting sidetracked with side shows. And there will be dogs barking always. That's even more prevalent with refereeing.
And now with social media.
And now social media, yeah. I think social media is probably overstepped the mark a little bit, but it definitely has, in my opinion, it's got great value. There is some good value attached to social media.
Yeah, that's all right. So, Jonathan, right now we're at our section where we do our quick fire, and I've got about 20 here, maybe 15 to 20. And some of them are to deal with rugby, some of them are just kind of to get to know you. It's really just for fun, so our listeners get a chance to understand Jonathan a little bit better. So, are you ready to try this out?
Hit me.
All right. First one. Who's the best player you ever reffed?
I'd probably say Christian Cullen.
Oh, good one.
In terms of, do you want me to explain or just?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think there were players that were very dominant in their space over the 25 years odd that I was reffing those players. But I think Christian Cullen, for me, was the best by a country mile in the 5-6 years where he was operating at the top tier. And he could sidestep a bus. He was incredibly strong for a lightish man. And I think he changed the way that the world viewed fullbacks.
I think that's fair. All right. Who's the best team you ever reffed?
Well, it's been proven it's New Zealand. I did ref South Africa in one test, so I'm happy to say that I think on our day, before democracy came into South Africa, we were ahead of New Zealand in terms of win-loss. But subsequent to that, I think we've lost some of our fibre, and New Zealand have capitalised on that, and they're definitely a dominant force in the world. Their strategy, their culture, their philosophy on the game, I think they're probably slightly better than South Africa. But I think probably New Zealand.
What's the best match you ever refereed?
Australia, New Zealand, 5th of September 2000. Last minute penalty, John Eales, to win the Bledisloe Cup, the Tri-Nations, and the title of the best team in the world with one kick. And I did it in New Zealand. I made a decision at the end of the game. The decision was right. But the next day in the papers, the headline of the front page was "The moment he broke our hearts," and they were referring to me.
That's hard. That goes right back to what you were saying about Churchill, right? Great match, though. One of the guys I work with is Australian, and he talks about the older times quite frequently. So, who's the friendliest player you ever reffed? Somebody that always good to joke on the field with.
Once again in my book, I've written. I did a team of the nicest players, and I'll just give you an example. Like I think Kevin Mialamu of the Auckland Blues and New Zealand. I think Chris Latham always had time for refs. Fullback for Australia. Dominici of France, always friendly, smiling, came over to us, talked to us all the time. Didn't ask from a bar of soap, but still very friendly. You know, the Donico Callahan, the nicest man, the most gentle guy off the field. I'm sure, you know, he was a tough man on the field, but really good to talk to off the field. So yeah, there are quite a few. I don't really have a favorite. I suppose I just remember, a couple of them that were very. I'll give you another story. Jerry Collins, the late Jerry Collins. He got a bonus for his 50th game for the Wellington Hurricanes, and he spent it on the opponents, the Waratahs, and the refs. Myself and Tapaheni kept buying us drinks the whole night. It was his bonus for getting 50 caps. And I just thought to myself, here's one of the hardest men you'll ref on the field. And I don't think there can be any doubt about that. But really a soft and generous man off it.
Yeah, that's a nice story. He was tough as nails. All right, who's that one pain in the butt that you had to ref? Maybe more than one.
In South Africa, when I was good, when you're coming up through the ranks, everything is sort of magnified because you're trying to make it. So there were two captains, Kobus Visser and Helgard Miller, both very nice men, but on the field, when the red mist descended, it was pretty difficult to talk to them. And because they were captains, it made it even more of a challenge. I sometimes got challenged by Brian O'Driscoll. Not to say that he wasn't right on occasion. I just don't think sometimes the approach was good, and that sort of charging in with a screaming voice is not something that I take kindly to. So, but obviously not taking away from his leadership, his ability, and what he needed to do as a captain. Part of the role of the captain is to challenge the referee. I think George Gregan as well. Pretty much, he could be very challenging for a ref.
Really?
Pretty much like a Jack Russell, always had something to say, and invariably it was something quite cutting. So almost like he had prepared it. So I was very lucky that I think we got on pretty well. So I was pretty lucky there.
All right. Do you have a favorite rugby tradition?
No, I actually am very untraditional. I'm very unsophisticated in my pre-match routine. The only thing that I have managed to hold on to are memorabilia from my games. So nice. I've got a pretty extensive set of memorabilia across domain. But no, I don't have any traditions, and I don't. Yeah.
What's do you have a rugby nickname?
JK was
JK.
Jake's JK. I think the English guys like to call me Cappers. I didn't mind. I got called a lot worse, so whatever they call me was fine.
All right. What about, do you have any rugby superstitions? Like no. left boot on before your right boot, anything like that?
No. Nothing. No. I'm like I said, I'm unsophisticated.
I think that means you're more sophisticated.
Well, I'm like a farmer. I'm not really, I get changed like a little bit before the game. I was always either running late or slightly late, or never missed the game. But yeah, it was just one of my things. I just didn't want to get ready in line with norms. I wanted to get ready when I was happy to get ready. It was part of my routine, I suppose.
Okay. All right, 3 people you'd take golfing with you. Could be anybody, dead or alive, rugby, non-rugby. It's up to you.
I don't golf to start with. I made a choice to drink red wine from a long time ago. So golfing was not something that I took up. But let's just say I did. I'd probably go with the guys that had the biggest influence on my career. So there was a bloke called Paul Dobson, who's recently died a couple of months ago, who was my confidant and mentor.
Sorry to hear about that.
Yeah, he'd be my first choice. There's another guy called Phil Botha, who I've just posted on my Instagram account, J Kaplan Ref, who had a significant role in my progress into the big pond. So he basically understood that I was never a round peg going into a round hole, and he allowed me to flourish in my own shape, and so I appreciated that from him.
Seems to have worked.
And what's that?
It seems to have worked.
Yeah, it worked for me. I mean, I stuck around for long enough, so I suppose some other people must have appreciated it as well. And I think my mom got me into it. I'd like to give her some credit for the effort that she put in. She didn't just get me into it. She quite liked to follow me around the world and come to some of my games. And I was happy to have her there because, you can never say thank you enough to, somebody like your mom who's given you that much, just not just in rugby, but outside of rugby as well.
It's great advice for the listeners. Always thank your mom. Be thankful for your mom. Great thoughts. All right. So you've traveled a lot, but what's your go-to travel destination, Jonathan?
Yeah. So I went to a lot of countries, a lot of cities. I basically left every place, every major center. I loved going to London. That was one of my favorites. Just forgotten the area now. Richmond. I loved going to Richmond in particular. That was probably my favorite suburb or area. But I just loved my autumn visits to England, sort of November-ish, were amazing. I think I loved the Irish spirit, the musical genius, the way that they were pretty much jolly about most things in life. And I actually reffed Ireland more times than anybody else. So, I ended up spending a lot of time there. But I think the country there where I probably most enjoyed the culture was the warmth of the Argentinians, where there's lots of hugging and the very tactile nation, and I enjoyed that. It's something that I think is very important, and they probably did it best. So very warm, very like I say, very tactile. Very I didn't spend a lot of time there, but the times that I did spend there were pretty much exceptional every time. And the thing was, they never had a lot to work with because I don't think it's a very wealthy country comparative to some of the others I went to. But they always found a way of entertaining us with their hearts, and that meant a lot to me.
It's nice. What's your favorite app on your phone? Or most used app, maybe?
I use Strava, to measure my runs. So I run marathons as a hobby, and Strava measures distance. At the moment, I'm pretty much, I'm just idling through COVID, and I haven't really done much. And I'm probably, I'm aging as well now, so I'm not sure how long I can keep it up. But I've done 132 marathons, so I suppose that's significant, and the Strava helps me to keep track of it. But like I've said to you, I do follow social media, so all those apps around Twitter, Parler, Facebook, all of them. I think they're very useful to keep up to date with what's happening in the world.
You're all over the social media. All right. I'm going to have to look you up now. What is your go-to food?
Oh, I like spicy. Yeah,
okay.
I like. No, so I was going to think what it is, but I like spicy. So I could have a spicy seafood risotto. With like chilies in it. That would be something. I used to have that quite often in Cape Town that's where I lived previously. So that's something I like. But if it's Thai, Indian, even Italian, I don't eat a lot of pizza and pasta. But those, if I can get something spicy that's, that doesn't look like a lettuce leaf, then I'm. And then I'm not really into this whole plant-based thing. I think some of it is faddish. So, quite like what we call it in South Africa, what we call a braai, what the rest of the world calls a barbecue. I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I like the idea of standing in front of a fire, and I'm not really alpha male. So if you want to grab the tongs away and fire away, I'm not. You can go for it.
You make it out to New Brunswick, I barbecue a mean burger and chicken. So anytime you want to come out, barbecue's on.
Well, I'm definitely planning on coming out because there is a marathon, I think, in Moncton or Fredericton, actually.
It's about an hour. It's about an hour from here.
Yeah. So I may take you up on that.
There we go. All right, chips or cookies?
Oh, neither.
Okay.
If I had to, yeah, neither really, because I'm not a massive fan of either of those at the moment.
Okay, that's fine. French fries or onion rings?
I've lately onion rings. Funnily
Onion
enough,
rings. Have you had
yeah, lately.
Have you had poutine yet?
Yeah, I have had it, but because I'm I'm watching my midriff, and I just noticed that the calories on poutine are it's off the scale
Yep.
comparative to just the burger. So I normally have just the burger. Thank
But
you
it's
very
so
much.
good though. They're so good.
It is so good. And you know what? When I have a couple of drinks and I'm out and about, poutine's definitely going to come into it. I've just been under a bit of pressure here, and I haven't been out a lot, so I'm sure it'll come into play.
You throw some jalapenos on there though, you're hooked for life, imagine.
Well, let's see.
All right, what's your favorite beer? You're a wine guy. Do you drink beer?
Yeah, I'm not. I don't have a big. I don't have a big engine for beer, so I'm more like the tequilas and Jägermeisters. I like red wine. I've tasted quite a few red wines from here that they're decent. I like the Malbecs from South America, but in terms of beer, I like the name called Farmer's Daughter. I think that's a pretty cool name.
Haven't had that one.
Yeah, well, it's actually a Canadian one, funny enough. But there's more Canadian craft beers than I've seen in a lot of other places. I think Belgian beers are actually my favorite beers. They've got a high alcohol content generally, and they're tasty, so you can taste what what you've ordered. And I'm not really a lager guy at all, so I like a Guinness, I must say. A Guinness, I'm pretty partial to a Guinness, and especially in cold weather, I think a Guinness does the trick.
That's my favorite too. All right, what's a guilty pleasure?
I like to have a punt on a horse race. I used to own horses in South Africa,
Okay.
and I like a punt on the horses. So when there's a big race, like let's say the Melbourne Cup or the Durban July, which is the biggest race in South Africa, didn't really follow American racing, but maybe get into the Kentucky Derby or something like that. I like to beat the system. That's one of my challenges. So I like to study, but if a horse is feeling sick, it doesn't matter how much you study. It's not feeling well, it's not going to perform. So, and I like beating the system. So, I'll go up against that. But in general, punting is a losing game, and that's why the bookies are in business and the punters aren't. So, like you said, it's a guilty pleasure, I suppose.
That's a good one, especially if you're good at it. What series are you binge watching right now?
I don't do series.
Okay. What's your favorite movie?
20 years ago, I loved Dances with Wolves.
That's a good
was
one.
one of my favorites. So, and the reason that I loved it was because it captured historical perspective. There was a massive wide angle cinematography, and I've always been fascinated by I think what you call here the First Nations, First Nation people, and the people that arrived afterwards, and the historical sort of context of battles and how things were fought out. And I just loved the idea of somebody who was basically on death's door and was happy to give it all up, and then forged a magnificent life for himself. And he didn't conform to what some script said. So there's a lot to take out of that. I know it's an old movie. It's probably not everybody's favorite, but it touched quite a raw note with me. So I enjoyed it.
Yeah, that is a really good movie. I really enjoyed that one too.
I like Legends of the Fall as well. Do you remember Legends of the Fall?
Yep.
So that was with
Anthony Hopkins.
Anthony Hopkins, Brad Pitt, Aidan Quinn.
Aidan Quinn.
And once again, the idea around it was brotherhood. Brotherhood was pretty strong. Family, a little bit of wildness, and also once again taking into account the people of the land, and nature and the natural order.
That's a good one. Who would play you in the Netflix movie of your life?
I haven't thought about that, but Matt Damon came into my head, so I'll just say him.
Matt Damon. Yeah. Who would play the leading lady?
I don't know. I don't follow actresses at the moment, but someone who's incredibly hot.
There you go. And last quick fire. What would the movie be called?
Well, my book was called Call It Like It Is, and it's sort of the way that I approach, I'm not, I don't try and be anti-establishment, but I also feel if I don't represent myself at the time, then nobody's going to help me out down the track. So yeah, I like the idea of Call It Like It Is. It's not for the purpose of upsetting people. It's not for the purpose of not being politically correct. It's for the purpose of representing myself and my core in that moment, and not having to apologize for being myself.
I think that's fair. I like that. I like the name of that book. All right, so we got a few questions left. One is you already talked about most difficult thing being a ref, and that's, the media. What would be the most rewarding thing about being a rugby ref?
I think for me, it was the creative process. I know this is going to sound strange, but it was the creative process around what I could do within the framework of the law. So the law was the fundamental. I had to stick to the framework of the law, but there are a lot of management cues that you can use to promote a better game. And that was my skill set. My skill set was in and around the philosophy and the strategy that I used to try and create aesthetically better looking games than perhaps some of my peers.
So how would you do that?
So one of the mechanisms is to create trust before the game. So I never used the team meetings as an icebreaker. That for me was pointless. I'd rather be drinking on my own. The idea around it was to try and allow the two teams individually to broach concerns, to talk like rugby men to each other, and for me to try and understand what they wanted from the game, how they wanted to play the game, and then see if it was legit or if it was just a ruse, and then try and incorporate it into my thinking around how I plan to referee the game. And so my vision of the game was always going to be to try and create a better spectacle, a better game, because that was me, that was mine. But I had to take into account what teams were trying to achieve as well. So there were some, especially in South Africa, there's some teams that are quite strong on set piece. So I had to honor that they had chosen players that were stronger at those facets and incorporate it into my approach, rather than just diss that because it perhaps didn't fall into my way of thinking. Like, I just wanted everything barbarian or everything liberated, which is not true. But you can understand. I'm just creating an example around trying to understand what teams want, and then being able to incorporate it into the macro picture of what you're doing.
It sounds like it's a lot of hard work too.
No, not really. I loved it. So I loved the thought that I put into each game leading up to the game. And I loved the pressure that I was under in the game. I react well to pressure. And I liked the fact that I was running. So that was nice for me because, I enjoy running. And so, and then also cerebrally to try and keep pushing the right buttons is a challenge, because like everybody knows, the ref also fatigues, but he doesn't get to sit on the bench. He's got to finish the game.
Yeah. Any funny rugby stories you can share with us? Anything that happened on the pitch that was funny? Anything that strikes you like just a good story about rugby?
Yeah, I didn't really see myself as a person to try and generate laughs, because part of my rationale was that it was a business, and that my role was there to facilitate and engender trust. And I don't think sometimes, there's some referees who do very well with humor. So Nigel's one of them. Nigel does, in my opinion, does well with humor. I think some people resent him for it because they would prefer him to just be refereeing the game. And that was my thought around what I did. Is I thought, let me be proficient at what I'm doing, and I'll get the respect that I need. And none of my friends were really on the field at any given moment. I wasn't trying to make friends with players or match officials or members of administrations. I went about my business. But I'll just tell you one story quickly. I was reffing Australia, New Zealand at the Olympic Stadium in Australia, in Sydney. Yeah, and Carlos Spencer had gone offside a couple of times and quite badly, but not, in my opinion, deliberately. So I felt it was a good opportunity to warn him. So I played advantage, gave the penalty under the sticks, the second one, and George Cregan kept going at me. Yellow card, mate, yellow card. And I don't claim to have a brilliant Australian accent either, but he kept going at me, and he knew me well by that stage. I mean, he knew that eventually I would draw a line in the sand, but he kept going, and I kept telling him, George, I got it. Let me make my decision and let me communicate with him. And he kept going, and I made the decision that I was going to reverse the penalty if he did it once more. And he did. It was almost as if I hadn't spoken to him. And I didn't really want to, because I wanted Australia to get at least 3 points out of it, because it was, the offsides they were bad offsides. So it sort of went against what I wanted. But having said that, if I hadn't done what I did, I would have lost Australia for the whole game, because I would have been on my case the whole game. And so I turned it around. I warned Spencer and Umanga that if it happened again, they were going to lose a player. And then at the next line out, New Zealand kicked it out, and the next line out, George comes running up to me, slaps me on the arse and says, "Okay, Jonathan, I'm calm and rational now." And it was I suppose in the moment it was quite funny, because I was sort of leering out the corner of my eyes, like, at him, going like, you've actually cost me an opportunity to reward you, by being an idiot, and it's the last thing I wanted. And he came to me and sort of lightened the whole thing up, and so we were able to draw a line under it and start from scratch. So I mean, in the moment, it was quite
good.
Funny.
That's a good one. All right, last question. If somebody wanted to get into reffing, if somebody is serious about taking it up, what advice would you give somebody starting out?
I think first of all, I don't think it's for everyone. So I think you need to be a specific animal to be able to do this. You need to be able to operate as a lone ranger. You need to be able to look at yourself in the mirror and be 100% truthful. You need to be able to take criticism and move on and move forward. There's some people that are going to tell you you're brilliant, and there's some that are going to tell you the exact opposite. And at the end of the day, neither of them count. The only person that counts is the guy in the mirror. And so, there's a reason why there aren't a lot of great referees. There have been a lot of international referees, but there's very few that have reached greatness, in my opinion. And one of the factors around that is the ability to handle pressure. And I call it, I always had the saying, like, there was flair, judgment, and nerve. So judgment was the ability to see right from wrong. Flair was the ability to add color to a picture, so to create a better game. Both of those probably can be taught. The last one can't be. Nerve, you can't teach somebody nerve. When bullets are flying around in the trenches, there's some people that panic, and there's others that are able to keep their heads. And so my advice is, if you think you're in trouble and you're not tough, then this is not for you.
That's great advice. I think that's great advice for anybody, not even if they're going into reffing, but just in general. That's really good. Listen, Jonathan, thanks very much. I know you've had a busy day with calls and stuff, so I really appreciate you taking the time out to chat with us, and look forward to seeing you do some wonders with Major League Rugby here in the hopefully near to be soon future.
Yeah, thanks for having me on your show. This is the first I did a lot of talks when I was in South Africa. This is the first show that I've been on in Canada, so hopefully I remember it fondly. And
no problem.
Just lastly, if anyone wants to follow, I've just started I've got a few Twitter account, a few Instagram accounts. The one that we've been speaking about is a rugby one. I've just started posting, and I didn't really want to talk about myself, and then I thought, some of the stories are quite interesting. So I started one called J Kaplan Ref. So if anyone's interested in rugby and they're interested in this type of line, you're welcome to follow. It's open to everyone.
Definitely. I'm going to hit that up for sure. Thanks very much for your time, Jonathan.
All right, mate. Take care.
Well, that was great, Jonathan. Appreciate that a lot, man. I had a lot of fun chatting with you. Jonathan and I chatted, a good 20 minutes before we started recording, and another good half an hour after we were done. We've messaged each other a few times. Just a great all around fella, and glad to see that he's here in Canada, and he's looking at a new aspect in his life by looking after Major League Rugby officials. It should be, I think this is going to be great for Major League Rugby. It's going to be great for the game. It's going to be great for those officials on the pitch, and we really like to welcome you here to Canada and North America, and wish you nothing but the best, Jonathan. Coming up soon, though, we've got a few on the go. We've got our front row pod will be airing next week. That will feature from Canada, Cole Keith, DJ Sears Drew, Ray Barkwell, Hubert Bidens, and Aaron Carpenter. We talked with the boys about some of the finer dark arts of the front row. It was a good conversation. And then we're going to do a 3-part series on wheelchair rugby here in Canada. And we've got Eric Rodriguez, Mike Whitehead, and Patrice Desjardins all lined up. And we're going to fire those ones out every 3 or 4 days because there's a lot of fun conversations and really great listening to those lads chat about rugby and the passion they have for wheelchair rugby, especially with the 2021 Paralympics coming up next year. And then we also were finally able to get in touch with Cindy Nellis, who's over in New Zealand right now. And you saw a little while ago, we featured a beautiful try by Cindy winning the Farah Palmer Cup there in New Zealand. And she's down there working and prepping for the 2021 Olympics with Canada. So we have hers coming up shortly as well. There's a host of others, but those are the ones that are recorded and getting ready to go. But to end off, as always, I want to thank everybody that listens, everybody that follows on social media, everybody that's spreading the word, the good rugby word. I want you to keep that up and make sure that you're telling your friends about these great guests that have been willing to share their story, walking you through how they started, in rookie rugby or in high school rugby through to university or to national, wherever they are. It's great that we can honor some of these great athletes and what they go through and what they do to help our country nationally and locally on the rugby pitch. As always, going to say thanks to Ben Sound Music for supplying us with their tunes. And as always, feel free to request topics for future podcasts, guests, questions, what have you. Make sure you reach out if there's something you want to know. Till next time, this is Jamie. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay sane. Most importantly, keep on rocking.